I've wanted to make this video for a long time now, and in the wake of the mass Xbox layoffs over the last few months, and with more likely on the horizon, now seems like the best time. I first started getting concerned back in January of 2022 when Microsoft announced its intention to acquire Activision Blizzard for a whopping sum of $68.7 billion. Now look, I'm no Activision fan. Sure, I grew up loving a game like Diablo 2 and the Call of Duty franchise helped define my teenage years, but I was young and naive then, and I didn't really realize what a garbage company they were, or rather, what a garbage company that they would become. I think back in the early 2000s when they were pumping out good games, they still just wanted to make great games. Video games were the main focus. It wasn't until the 2010s that things started really taking a turn for the worse, where the priority became fiscal quarters and not fun games. But this video isn't even about Activision, it's about Microsoft acquiring them. And even though the 2022 version of Activision sucked, it was still a bad precedent to set within the industry. Luckily, the FTC as well as other regulatory bodies raised concerns over the acquisition. The FTC is the Federal Trade Commission, and it's a US government agency designed to ensure a fair marketplace. Basically, a huge pillar of what it aims to do outside of protecting consumers is it is there to prevent monopolistic and anti-competitive business practices. So when I heard they were stepping in, I breathed a sigh of relief. Surely one of the largest gaming studios in the entire industry with some of the biggest franchises in gaming such as Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, and Diablo, among others, wouldn't be allowed to be sold. I mean, the purchase price alone should have been a huge red flag. Numbers vary, but the final cost was around $75 billion. Surely any company that can afford that is already a monopoly. So the FTC, which is designed to restrict monopolies, clearly got this decision wrong. Again, 2022 me was young and naive and hopeful that common sense would rule out and that the merger would be overruled. But unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. Whether it was incompetence and ignorance that led to the decision because the geriatrics who reside all over the US government just don't understand gaming whatsoever, so they didn't know the ramifications of the case, or it was a willful decision to let the second biggest company in the entire world get even bigger and grow their monopoly even more. We'll never know. And the FTC isn't the only party at fault. The UK's Competitions and Market Authority was also involved in reviewing the merger, and according to Wikipedia, there were as many as 16 regulatory bodies which reviewed the acquisition, including the European Commission, which represents a total of 31 European countries. So the FTC isn't wholly to blame here. Nearly all of these regulatory bodies approved the case, and in the case of the FTC, they officially dropped the case quite recently on May 22nd, 2025. But officially, the deal went through back on October 13th, 2023, and it set a course for the industry where the ramifications will likely be felt for decades. As shitty as the recent Xbox layoff news has been, I fear it's only going to get much worse. This is truly just the beginning. We're in the infancy phase. See, Microsoft is a behemoth. It has a market cap of over $5 billion. Do you think a company like that really cares about making great video games? No. And that right there is the crux of the issue. The only thing Microsoft truly cares about is a phrase that I've grown to hate more than any other in the world. They only care about creating or maximizing shareholder value. There is a law that publicly traded companies have to abide by, and it's called a fiduciary duty. A fiduciary duty is a legal obligation for one party, the fiduciary, to act in the best interests of another party, the beneficiary or principal. Basically, the fiduciary has to prioritize the beneficiary's interest above their own and to avoid conflicts of interest. On face value, it's actually a good law. You have to act in the best interests of the other party involved. So with publicly traded companies, it means the company has to make decisions that are in the best interest of the shareholders. They can't willfully make horrible decisions that will tank the company. The problem is this concept has been completely bastardized, and ironically, the decisions are not made in the best interests of the company or the shareholders anymore. No, they're only made in the interest of quarterly profits. Capcom recently released Monster Hunter Wilds, and the game was not ready to launch on PC at all. But they pushed it out on February 28th because it had to fall in the window of their 2024 fiscal year to appease the goddamn shareholders. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think it would be better for shareholders to get a small bump to Capcom stock when the game releases, only for the sentiment of the game to go down the toilet in the months to follow, permanently damaging Capcom's brand and reputation? Or would it be better for Monster Hunter Wilds to delay the game to optimize PC performance and make it complete on release so that the players who actually purchase the game grow to love the game and will trust that Capcom have their best interests at heart whenever they ship a new game? The latter is obviously the best answer. A game shipping in a polished, feature-complete state is far better for the brand in the long term, even if its stocks take a hit in the short term. But the decision makers at these massive companies don't see it this way. They just want the stock to go up quarter over quarter and kick problems down the road forever. Unfortunately, I was one of the people who bought Monster Hunter Wilds, so I helped contribute to this. Wilds sold over 10 million copies, so it was clearly a commercial success. So Capcom and the shareholders got the bump that they were looking for. I don't think they really care that the PC port of the game is in a horrendous state. They made their money, and that's all that matters to them. And that is the problem, and this is where it all ties back into the theme of the video, why monopolization is so bad for the industry. Because as these smaller studios get bought up by these massive corporations, everyone suffers. You get less competition in the marketplace. Instead of these game studios just competing against each other to make great games, they're now all owned by a few giant monoliths. Sony acquired Bungie, which is a horrible company in their own right, but now they're being ran by an even bigger company. Well, sort of. Maybe this wasn't the best example because I think Bungie still mostly retain their autonomy and still have rights to their IP, but the point is they are now a big company under the umbrella of an even bigger company. More monopolization. Unfortunately for Sony, Bungie has rotten leadership and I bet they're regretting that purchase. But the overarching theme still stands, that another big studio with a history of making once great games is now owned by an even larger company. So now the goal is less and less about creating a fun game and more about just making money. And when this happens, it seems that the studios really lose sight of what matters. If you make a great game that is tons of fun to play, people will buy it. Look at Clair Obscur Expedition 33, a small dev team that created a masterpiece because they had a vision that they cared about, a goal to make a fun-ass game that they would want to play. No microtransactions. There's tons of stuff to earn in that game, and it's all done by playing the game. A throwback to a simpler time in gaming. So credit to Sandfall for doing so much with so little. It goes to show that with passion and when given enough time to polish the game until you're satisfied with it, people can create some amazing things. But as these studios all get bought up by bigger and bigger companies, that no longer becomes the goal. The goal now becomes shipping games that can make the most money. Sony keeps betting on live service failure after live service failure, hoping that just one of them hits so they can make that sweet Fortnite money. But how many failures do you have to put up with? And on top of this, as these companies get bigger and bigger, they are more and more bloated. Again, Clair Obscur proved that with modern technology, you can make an incredible game with a very lean team and lean budget. But these big corporations are the opposite of that. So much middle management and bureaucracy that it seems like nothing can even get done anymore. Granted, some of this is thanks to the complexity of modern day games, so they just do take longer to produce, but a lot of it is because there are too many cooks in the kitchen. One simple change has to go through countless approval processes, rather than just giving the developer the freedom and flexibility to make a decision that they know is right for the art that they're making. And speaking of this, again, the actual creative process is then tainted by trying to shoehorn in ways to monetize the product. Some developers still just want to make a great game, but you have some useless upper manager whose bonus is tied to selling microtransactions, so now you have to compromise the game structure so that you can manipulate the players into spending money. The studios that make these games are then going to get dissolved, but who is really to blame? We all know the debacle that is Concord, but that was from Firewalk Studios, who had never really made anything before, so I want to use an even sadder example here. Rocksteady Studios. I loved the Batman games in the early 2010s, Asylum in 2009, City in 2011, and Night in 2015. These games were bangers, and I would assume the studio enjoyed making them because you can feel the passion in those games, just like you can in Clair Obscur Expedition 33. But then, a studio known for single-player action-adventure games gets put on a live service project that is Suicide Squad. And that game was a failure by every measure. Did the studio really want to make that game? Probably not, but Warner Bros., who owns the studio, probably wanted a piece of that sweet live service pie. So we got a generic, bland, unfinished game with promises of more content in the future. And just to go back to those Batman games for a second, 3 games that released in a 6-year span. I want to reiterate that I know nothing about making games, but those games were all great and all came out in rather quick succession. So what is going on these days where it takes 5 years minimum to just create a game now? I know they're more graphically impressive than ever, and I'm sure there are lots of reasons for this, but I do think a contributing factor is just how inefficient it is from a workplace structure perspective. And that is only going to get worse as companies like Microsoft keep trying to oversee more and more studios. And that's a problem. As these companies keep getting bought up by giant corporations, they no longer have the autonomy to make what they want to make. And even if they do get that autonomy to make a cool ass game like Hi-Fi Rush from Tango Gameworks, a game that was critically acclaimed and well received by the gaming audience, you still are at risk of getting shut down just because it didn't sell well enough. Or simply because some Microsoft executive wants to shut you down. Microsoft's whole strategy seems to be to buy up studios so that they can pump up the value of Xbox Game Pass, but they don't actually care about making or providing good games. If they did, they wouldn't have dissolved Tango Gameworks, and they wouldn't be slashing staff left and right. If any company can afford the odd game to fail financially, it's fucking Microsoft, who in 2024 had $245 billion in annual revenue. That's a 16% increase year over year from 2023. But you know what? If next year they only go up by 10%, it will be looked at as a failure because the growth wasn't as much. The whole damn stock market is predicated around growth, and I have a newsflash for all the finance dickheads, but you can't have infinite growth. But trust me, that's what they want. So what are the next steps? Well, it's already being reported that Microsoft is trying to fill some of the vacant positions from the layoffs with either AI or H-1B visa workers, which allows companies to hire foreign workers, basically so they can pay them less and give them less benefits. Again, if any company can weather the storm of a game performing poorly financially, it's Microsoft. But as is always the case with these big companies, they are the first to resort to layoffs for their precious quarterly earnings targets. You can say a lot of bad about Nintendo, but at least they stick to their core philosophy of making great games. Microsoft doesn't give a shit about that. They just want more revenue streams. And this has a negative effect on the industry because A, real creatives don't want to work for companies that don't actually want to make something cool and good. And B, as these studios all get bought up by the likes of Tencent, Sony, Microsoft, and Warner Bros., there are going to be less and less places to work at for these passionate developers. Xbox now owns a laundry list of studios, so even if someone was laid off by, say, Tango Gameworks, they likely aren't going to want to go to one of these other studios that is owned by Microsoft. So you look elsewhere, and it's like, shit, those are also owned by some shitty corporate overlord as well. So as these studios continue to get acquired by giant corporations, it just means that those studios are less likely to make games that they want to make and more likely to make games that the executives think will make the most money. And everyone suffers when that's the case. Creative developers are stifled and they can't truly make fun games that they think will be awesome. Therefore, they suffer. Gamers suffer because we now have less cool and fun games to play and more manipulative games that are just there to funnel you to their in-game store. And companies also suffer because while maybe these decisions are good for your short-term quarterly earnings goals, they will only hurt you long-term. I'm sure that Microsoft's stock takes a bump every time they acquire a new studio because to investors it's like, ooh, more games to make more money. And then ironically, when they lay that staff off, it also goes up because it's like, ooh, we're trimming costs. The whole stock market's a fucking joke now, and it has been for a while. It's all speculative now, and the fundamentals don't even matter anymore. Uber can lose money year after year and still go up simply because they're another monopoly. They only care about having a high user base. As long as they are adding customers, who cares if they're actually making money? Same goes for Xbox Game Pass. But with all these layoffs, you're damaging quality content who will no longer want to work for you. And you're getting rid of top quality workers as well. Nintendo has shown us the formula. The Wii U failed commercially, but they didn't lay everyone off. They kept them around, and the leaders took a hit to their salaries and bonuses. This worked in a number of ways. It made the developers feel safe in their positions, where if things didn't go so well, the company would weather the storm and protect them. This in turn then makes people want to work there and perform well for you. I've seen it at a company I used to work for. When they did right by us, we would all volunteer for overtime and help out when needed. But when they started nickel and diming and treating us like shit, we responded in kind by not giving a shit about the company, not going above and beyond. But back to Nintendo, they also retained that high quality talent so that they could make fun, new and amazing games in the future, which would go on to sell well and ultimately, long term, only help the company financially in the long run. And this came to a head recently with the launch of the Switch 2, which is now the fastest selling console ever. And then Donkey Kong Bonanza's on the horizon and looks to be another Nintendo banger that consumers will happily shell out money for because if there's one thing you can count on Nintendo for, it's to deliver high quality first party titles. But do you think they would be able to do that if they got rid of a bunch of their staff every couple years just so that they can see their stock price go up by a couple of percentage points? Fuck no. To tie it all back to monopolization though, they're killing the will of the devs. And in an industry that is predicated on creativity, it's hard as hell to be creative and want to make cool stuff when you're constantly worried about layoffs, or morale is piss poor around the studio. And as more and more studios get acquired, as I pointed out, this will only keep happening. And that is not good for anyone. And in this video, I didn't even touch on EA and how they've been buying up studios and laying off people by the thousands as well over the years. Or how another casualty from this latest round of layoffs is the wonderful racing franchise Forza. I could truly go on with examples for hours, but this video wasn't meant to be a documentary on every single thing these terrible companies have done. It was more just to bring light to the fact that no matter the industry, monopolization is bad for everyone, and there's reasons we have laws that protect against it. And sadly, as politicians keep being bought up by billionaires and company executives, those laws that have been put in place protect us less and less. Anyways, I could keep going on with examples and whatever else, but I think I'll just call it there. I plan on doing other deep dives in a similar vein about how corporatism is antithetical to creativity and ruining the games industry, so if you're interested in that type of content, then be sure to subscribe. Also, follow me on Twitch at itstizzle7. Right now, I'm playing Death Stranding 2 and really enjoying it. And lastly, if you're still here, I appreciate you watching to the end. Feel free to give more examples in the comments or just share your thoughts about the gaming industry. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.